Mordor, The Deaths of Dejenol, no relation to Tolkien's Mordor, is easily my most favorite game of 1995, and in my top 20 of all time. Yes, that's how good it is. And yes, it's incredibly robust title that's nearly infinitely replayable, and very difficult to explain. And even more so, explain in a way that would prevent me from skipping anything that it offers, cause all of it is important in one way or another. I'm sure that I will, cause it's probably the biggest small game that I've ever spoken about. What do I mean by big small game? Well, it's feature-rich, nay, abundant, all the while having very basic, even awful to some presentation. It looks as if it was made in 15 minutes, when in fact, when you immerse yourself in it, it feels as if hundreds if not thousands of hours went into its creation. Oh man, I already feel that this is going to be a tough one to tackle. So let's start where the story starts, in city of Dejenol, under which old dwarven mines lay. Abandoned for years, eventually collapsed in one of the lower floors, opening the passage for monsters to pour out of and terrorize the city. So it was decided that the mines needed to be permanently shut down, and that's exactly what they were for decades. Eventually, however, city elders proclaimed that they should reopen, and adventurers were hired to clear them out. This quickly fell to what lived within, and a new bunch of young 16-year-old trainees was tasked with exploring and clearing the dungeon. And you're one of such young adventurers. Or two, or three, or four for that matter, cause you can actually form a party in Mordor. And you should, really. As playing the game with just one character is more directed towards advanced players who've ventured the depths of Dejenol for at least few hundred hours and know at least a bit how game's inner mechanics work and how they intertwine with each other. And yes, you've heard that right, hundreds of hours. When you start the game, same as with most dungeon crawling RPGs, you have to create your party of characters. So pick the name, and that's where the easy part of the game ends. Cause even picking a class is tough. Many of them are race or alignment locked, so you'll have to pick those appropriately, but most importantly some are stats locked. You will notice while playing that you cannot pick certain classes whatever you do here. And believe it or not, that's by design, because some classes you can only switch to after hours of playing and leveling a character in one of the basic ones. There's no other way of obtaining them. Even more so, classes have their proficiency levels, which you can raise by fulfilling guild quests. Because of course that there's guilds in Mordor, and there's many more of these than in any game old or new that you've played to date. Naturally, mixed class builds here are very robust and powerful if you manage to learn the game after sinking countless of hours in it, that is. All to be able to create those. It's worth noting at this point, still in Creator, that certain gear items, be it weapon or armor, may have stat requirements, and same goes for spells. So you will, without a shred of a doubt, fail at Mordor at least few times before realizing how to build a good starter character. But it's part of the fun. It's not a game for a Sunday role-playing fan, it's for someone who loves depth in their games and likes to learn all that there is about them, to eventually aim for min-maxing of stats. Racial stats that are shown in the creator can be extended, and you can eventually go over the max by even up to 5 points. Characters, well, all starting at 16, depending on the race, have different lifespans, and if killed and resurrected or lost in a dungeon, they may lose years of their life, and it's not unusual to witness your favorites die of old age. And they will, as like I said, mastering Mordor is a full-time job. But one you can actually enjoy and learn from. Or is it just me that I'm not happy where I am in my life employment-wise? Oh well, let's move on. When you've done with creating your characters, the game will ask you for a password, which you can ignore. It's a feature that was implemented as devs expected the game to be played by many different players on the same PC sharing the same dungeon. And yeah, they do. So more often than not, if there's more of you playing, you may actually find in dungeon a body of another player who died there before. And you can do both. Loot it, because of course you need the gear and gold more than the dead guy does, or bring it back to town to resurrect it. And honestly, it's a feature that I mostly use to recover my own great fallen adventurers with a group of new ones, just to bring it back to default once more and complement my new party with it. Anyway, onward we go. Your party starts in city of Dejenol. On first glance, there's not a lot there. General store, morgue, guilds, dungeon, confinement, seer and bank. But as the game goes, you learn how big in content these few locations are and how often you'll be coming back to town and using them. Let me give you a quick rundown of what they are. General store allows you to buy and sell items, simple as that. Items will change in time and they have various ranks of quality, alignment requirements and can be magical too, which is something you learn playing quite quickly, so I'm not giving it an in-depth look here. But what we will talk about are the other things you can do in the store, namely uncurse items. Cause while you're traveling, you may decide to equip a powerful new weapon or armor piece that you found, just to learn that it was cursed, affects your stats negatively, and you cannot just take it off. So you have to uncurse it first in town. Then there's combine items option, which, well, as it says, allows you to combine certain items to get better ones. It's more of a mid-game thing, so you'll likely not use it for hours. And finally, you can identify unknown items to check if they're cursed or magical, and if they are the latter, then what bonuses they actually offer. Realigning the items changes their alignment for characters to be able to use them. It looks simple, but there's a lot of depth here. In Mork, you can raise fallen heroes for a price obviously and at a risk, but you'll be doing this quite often so you'll master it in no time, because in Mordor it's really not unusual to venture into dungeons with 4 heroes and come back with just a couple, carrying the other fallen 2 back to have them resurrected. It's a cycle of life. No, scratch that. Batman, remove that please in editing, I wanna try again. Thanks. It's a cycle of dungeon crawling. The guilds allow you to level up in your particular chosen class, fulfill guild quests and join other guilds if your stats allow you to. And while initially after hours of grinding for one guild, switching to another may feel like you've lost a lot of your oomph, your power, it's only temporary, as if you manage to raise it up to the similar level you were in previous one, you will benefit from having both and will ultimately be stronger than you would have been just joining one. It's worth noting that there's no limit to how many you can join other than the stats requirement and your character's age. Confinement is an unusual part of town. At first it's not very populated, but it will change the more you play the game. It's where you can quote-unquote buy companions, sell them and identify those that joined you on your adventures. Because yes, some creatures, seeing your undoubtedly overwhelming might cause you're you so amazing, or them just not being aggressive whatsoever, may ask to join you in dungeons. These are not human companions, they are just creatures of various kinds, big and small. They have certain alignment requirements, so for instance your good heroes won't be able to hire evil companions, and only those that are neutral are also good. The seer's primary use is to hustle you out of your money. I'm obviously kidding, but he is expensive. At some point when you level up in the guild, you're going to receive a quest from your guild master to defeat a certain enemy to be able to progress further. It's an exam of sorts. You have to find and defeat a particular monster, you see. They are usually, but not always, something you should be able to tackle, but the problem is not their strength, but where they might be. Because you can either search for them when you've seen them last, if you remember where it was that is, and if the dungeon repopulated and rolled for the same kind of an enemy, which is not always the case. Or you can go to Seer, pay him obscene amounts of money to detect where the monster was last seen. He will give you a general idea of the flora and location, and more often than not the monster is there somewhere. Not always though, so while it's advisable to use Seer's services when you have money to burn, when you don't, it may be smart to walk around on your own looking for it first. And hopefully earning some money in the process too. Bank, as you might have guessed, being the brilliant potato that you are, is where you can store items and money that you don't want to lose in the dungeon. They are lost when your character dies or a creature or monster can just straight up steal them from you. Because yes, both enemies and you can steal from each other provided you have skills to do so. It's a good practice to always keep at least enough money in a bank to be able to resurrect your whole party. The price of resurrection changes depending on number of times an adventurer was brought back, where he died and his level, so adjust your savings accordingly. There is also a highlighted character stats sheet showing any and all details about it, a party information screen in which you can highlight individual characters to check their stats out or perform actions or tasks in town as them. Oh, and it's worth remembering that the first 2 characters out of the 4 are in the front line, and the last 2 are in the back. It's especially important for casters and ranged weapon users not to be in the front of a party, as they're not damage sponges in any way imaginable. Objects and spells window allows you to prepare and equip items and spells on your character and is something you'll be using constantly as your adventure progresses. Finally, Dungeon takes you straight into the entrance of the first of 15 levels of the Undercity dungeon. You might think that 15 is not a lot, but trust me, given that Mordor offers more than 400 different creatures and 366 different items to find, equip and use, it's not a short or simple game. Underground, your city interface disappears and instead you get a dungeon view, with a small square window showing your first-person perspective of where you're at, a larger area to the right of it that will and does display all the enemies in particular group that you're fighting against, and an auto minimap that is your best friend in a whole wide world of Mordor, as it will map for you all the drops, speed and rotating traps, random teleporters, doors, stairs, everything that's needed on your adventure. The first few to a dozen of hours is as much about exploration as it is about survival, and it's in your best interest to do what you can, not to die. It is easier said than done, cause everything that lives in the dungeon seems to be bent on killing you. It seems that it's good time for another Mordor lesson, kids. So if you see that you may not be up to a task of defeating a certain enemy or are low on health deep in the dungeon, it's best to direct yourself towards the city ASAP rather than risk it all. Cause if you die in the dungeon and have no other characters to bring your fallen heroes, you have to wait for someone to find you. And it can take anything from few days to months, which obviously adds this time to your character's age, and resurrection of that kind is much more expensive than the one in town. Same goes for poison or any other statuses that may eat up on your health points. The game is in real time, so if you're affected by them, running back to town is not only smart but also suggested solution and nothing to be ashamed of. Battle happens automatically in melee. If you want to use spells, however, you have to pick and cast them yourself. Fortunately, killed monsters stay just that. So dead, at least for a little while before the dungeons are repopulated, so usually backtracking is not a big issue. Especially that you need to come back to town to level up anyway. You can collect only as much experience in the dungeon as it is required to grab the next level, and enough for one more after that, short of 1 experience point. So basically nearly whole 2 levels, at which point you become so-called pinned and don't earn any experience anymore and have to come back to town to level up. Consider the first dungeon level as your tutorial. There's a decent spread of various monsters in it, teaching you what to expect from Mordor. Some steal, some are invisible and may require a spell or someone who actually sees invisible creatures to kill them easier, some are resistant to one type of damage or another, but generally speaking they're not too demanding. From second floor onward though, the game becomes serious and you can often expect a proper challenge. So I suggest mapping the entire first level before traveling onward, not only to level up as much as possible and prepare for what's ahead, but also to learn how the game works. I'm gonna do you a solid here with a tiny spoiler of sorts, so if you wanna avoid it, I'll chapter it for your convenience so that you can skip it. In the far left of the first level there's a hidden teleporter in 1x1 room that will randomly teleport you to a place on another, deeper floor where you will most likely die as soon as you meet any enemy, so avoid that room until you feel more comfortable playing. Defeated enemies often leave chests behind, and some of these may be trapped, so it's good to have someone in your party who can actually detect and disarm traps, and also a caster who can open magically locked chests. Mordor is a ginormous game, one of the biggest to come out in 1995. It may not feel like it as you map out the first dungeon level, but more you play, the quicker you realize that the deeper you go into dungeons, the more strategic and less all-out attack your approach should become. You might have noticed by now that aside from general reasoning for your entering the dungeon, I've said nothing about the story. You didn't? Oh well, perhaps you need a couple more visits to Guild to level up your perception, huh? Anyway, the story is basically non-existent. You play Mordor to play Mordor. It's a dungeon crawling adventure of epic proportions where you try to get to the bottom floor and complete it, while min-maxing your builds to be able to even attempt it. It's an amazing little game. Yes, little, it's like a few megs in size only, which will undoubtedly fill your life with hundreds if not thousands of wasted hours, dying time after time again, learning what to improve for the next run. It's my favorite game of 1995 and one of the faves out of all games I've ever played. Couple years later, a sequel Mordor 2 was planned and then cancelled, and eventually re-released with improved full 3D graphics in 2000 as Demise Rise of the Kutan. It's also an incredible game, but I don't feel as much melancholy towards it as I do for Mordor. In the end, Mordor is a 1 in 1,000 game. Deep, challenging and most importantly fun. And what it lacks in presentation, it more than makes up for in playability. A true hidden gem if there ever was one. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too. But I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting that bell, that is. And when you hit that bell, whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you a small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're amazing and stars among the retro community. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running and also in the video description below. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.